All right, so today we have Miss Patricia Literte, doctor. Yes, sorry, doctor. She is an associate professor in sociology, and she's also the director of the McNair Scholarship Program. She helps assist students from underrepresented, low-income, and first-generation backgrounds with successfully applying to and completing PhD programs. And some of her interests are race, higher ed, and urban sociology. Welcome.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for having me back again. Before we get started, I just want to go around the room, and if you could introduce yourself and tell me what your program is, and then what your topics or areas of interest are within your field.
Hi, my name is Maria, and I'm going here for the MS counseling program with the Latinx focus. I'm interested in working with them.
Hi, my name is Josie. I'll be going to counseling Long Beach in the master's program. I want to focus on mental health and religion. Hi, my name is Gabby. I have a master's program in social work here at Fulton, and is mental health. So I'll be going here for the master's in social work too, and my research area of interest is generation Asian American.
Angela, and I'll be pursuing the MS in counseling here at Housing Fullerton. My interest is health and stigma.
My name is Dana, and I'll be pursuing Master of Social Work here at Housing Fullerton. One topic of interest is low-income youth and their pursuit of higher education.
Hi, my name is Amy, and I'll be coming here for the Masters of Public Health, and my topic of population or interest that I want to work with is Latinos and minority health.
My name is Mary. I'll be going to USC for the Master Health Administration program. My interest is childhood obesity in Latino community.
I am Janet Hernandez. I'll be doing the social work program here at Cal State Fullerton with a concentration in child welfare.
My name is Patricia Parks. I'll also be in the MSW program here at Cal State Fullerton and my concentration.
My name is Jessie Song. I'll be doing the Master's of Social Work program here at Cal State Fullerton as well, with emphasis on mental health. And the topic that I'm interested in is mental health among youth.
I'm Mexico, also I'm also doing the MS in counseling with the animal emphasis. So my topic is with the Latino.
My name is Serena. I'll be attending Loma Linda University for their Comp Science and Disorders program, and I'm interested in working, part of my topic is working with adults with adaptation.
Hi, my name is Mohammed. I will be going to Cal State Long Beach for Master's in Public Health. My topic of interest is anything related to mental health.
My name is Leon Rodriguez. I will be coming here at Cal State Fullerton for my master's of and some interest is voice disorders or anything that basically anything that has to do with communication.
Sciences and disorders, and my topic was the performance on semantic meaning for adults with addiction.
Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves. And I think probably a lot of your research topics in some capacities will relate to our discussions today. But just to tell you a little bit about myself, as I was introduced, I'm from faculty in the Department of Sociology. I also direct the McNair Scholarship Program. The McNair Scholarship Program is funded by the U.S. Department of Education, and we help undergraduates who are from low-income, first-generation, first in their family go to college, and underrepresented backgrounds prepare for successful entrance into graduate school with a particular emphasis on PhD programs. Even though we focus on working with undergraduates, my staff and I are always open to chatting with other students, advising other students. So please don't be shy if you ever want to drop by. It's an open door. We're in Langsdorff Hall 640. Also, if you're interested too, we throughout the year at least have maybe a handful of events that are open to any students. One of the main ones being the Southern California Forum for Diversity in Graduate Education, which rotates across different Southern California campuses. It's at University of San Diego this year in October. So if that would be something that you'd be interested in attending, just let me know so I can put you on our email list. We provide the transportation, and essentially it's a whole day long event. And this would be probably for those of you who might be interested after you finish your master's going on further. They talk about how to write a strong statement of purpose, fellowships and funding for doctoral or PhD programs. A huge grad fair with probably usually over 100 recruiters from around the country. So if you're already been thinking beyond your master's program, that would be a great event for you to go to. It's at no cost to you. So just a little background about myself. I did go to USC, have my master's and my PhD in sociology from SC with an emphasis in higher education and race and ethnicity. I also have research interest in urban sociology. But for the most part, I've been doing less at the professor side and more of the administrative side in terms of working with the McNair Scholars Program. So I've been asked to talk about navigating challenges as a person of color within graduate education. And also I want to extend that conversation even further and address intersectionality, which is, I know people familiar with that terminology? Yes, I hear. Can you share what your understanding of it is?
Because I took an intro to women gender studies class, so we touched on it. It's kind of like when I want to say like different, like your race, your gender, your identity, kind of like they all come together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the idea, right? So the concept of intersectionality is used most commonly in the social sciences and ethnic studies, and it refers to the fact that for all of us, we occupy multiple identities, right? We're not just one thing. We have a gender identity, a sexual orientation, a racial identity, a class identity, and all of those intersect to make us who we are. And so I want to extend the conversation to include those multitudes of identities, because for some people within graduate school, in terms of their identities or their social position, maybe it's not race that turns out to be the most salient thing. Maybe it's gender, or maybe it's gender in combination with your race, or maybe it's the fact that you come from a first generation background that becomes the most impactful on your graduate education. So I wanted to start off with a couple questions. Usually I like students to talk more than I talk. So the first question would be, do you feel that you will face challenges in graduate school related to issues of race, class, etc., all the other identities that I mentioned? It could be your gender. Again, it could be being the first in your family to go to college, being a first-generation immigrant, any of those aspects of your identity. Do you think it's going to affect your graduate school experiences? And if so, what do you think those challenges would be? What are your concerns about navigating those challenges? And then lastly, in this particular session, are there particular topics that you're interested in discussing? Because I want to make sure to address what your interests are in relationship to this topic. So if you can just take a few minutes and maybe turn to a couple people next to you and answer these questions, and then we'll come back and share out.
Do you feel
Sorry.
move a lot of those chemicals. Just like stuff like I mean, there's no way for it. I did it from last summer. How about what's yours?
It's like I have to be a care myself. Yeah.
Okay, everyone, if we could come back together. And I want to go through the first couple of questions in combination. Can anyone share what some of their challenges, what some challenges they think are going to be in graduate school, how they're going to navigate them, share what they talked about in their group.
I think for me, my family, they're not gonna be able to like really understand me because I've never been to grad school. So they're just like, oh, you'll be fine. That's all they tell me. And I'm like, that's not everything.
Anyone else have concerns about family and the fact that they're the first in their family to go to college or graduate school? So what are some of those concerns surrounding family?
I think the time we spend at school will probably be worrisome to them. They probably think the area they're like who stay at school for so long. You know, there's something that we're not sitting off, but I'm just gonna tell them. Doing my thing. Yeah.
Like, are you sure?
Taking a picture.
My biggest concern is just like letting them down because they already put me on this like pedestal. And so it's like keeping up that pressure and just having time for self-care and myself. It's just, like balancing, finding that balance. Yes.
Any other thoughts related to the family issues?
Yeah, I think just like I won't have any so much for support in this like navigating like graduate school. I feel like a lot of the stuff I have to figure out myself is like even applications and like choosing your classes and all that is like something that I kind of figure out myself.
Any other issues? So then the second question is, what are your thoughts on navigating those challenges with your families? Has anyone found something that they feel really works in terms of communicating with their family members? They're stuck and they can't get it across to their family members.
I think it's helped me to just let them know like what my schedule looks like. I have like a printout of what my day looks like, and it just helps them like understand like, oh, I'm busy, and so they know when to call me or whatever. And so I still try to include them that way, but.
Yeah, I also have a schedule printed out for my mom. Where I am to be. Meet me. Call me this time.
Anything else? Well, I want to tell you, just in terms of the student populations I work with, but just in general, you're definitely not alone. It's really common, increasingly common, especially at an institution like Cal State Fullerton, for there to be a large population of first-generation students, right? First-generation college students. And there are many, many people who are confronted with issues that are family-oriented, right? Whether it's the family doesn't understand why you're doing what you're doing, doesn't understand why you're going to grad school, what this grad school thing is. I thought you were done. Right, that you're done. Are you supposed to be getting a job now? What do you do? What are you telling me? You're going to keep going to school? They're worried about money for you. Right? Those are all really common questions that come up. And I don't think there's not necessarily in the literature or whatnot, there's not necessarily a specific step 1 through 5 of how to deal with the family issues, because everyone's family is different. But I think there are a couple best practices, right? One is the things that you ladies mentioned in terms of communication. Even though it's hard, to as much as possible communicate to your family members things as basic as like, look, this is what my schedule looks like on a daily basis. Here's the actual printout of my class schedule, right? This is when I'm in class. This is when I'm going to be working. Or if it's trying to help them understand why you're doing what you're doing. Talking about how you need this, which I'm sure is the case for a lot of you, that you actually need this particular master's degree in order to have the career you want to have. Right? That's why a lot of people go to graduate school, is they actually need that higher level of education, which is going to put you in a better position over the long term financially. And I always have to skip ahead to the end because that's where I have the stuff about the family. And there's an updated one to this. But this is one of my favorite charts to show families who are concerned about why their child isn't automatically working after getting their bachelor's degree. And they think you're just postponing being an adult and getting a job, is to look at the actual numbers, right? And speak to, yes, the literal issue of money. And the fact that as you go up and you get a master's degree, your earnings are going to increase substantially. And then conversely, on the other side, your chances of being unemployed are going to decrease substantially. So this is all for your betterment over the long-term economic. And so that's why, again, this is one of my favorite charts to show parents, to show them there actually is a specific outcome, right, related to economic security that relates to what you're doing now. So this is not just, I don't want to go out there in the real world and get a full-time job. Some of you might still be working full-time, but it's not about that. Right? It's about these longer-term goals, economic security, having the career that you want to have that's going to pay you that higher amount of money. And sometimes that helps family members better understand if they're just looking at the numbers and what the actual outcomes are. And see that, okay, you're doing this for a particular reason. And again, not that you're just doing it for more money. I don't know, maybe some of you are, right? But most people aren't, right? But that's oftentimes a concern of family members. So you want to speak and respond to people's concerns, right? You kind of have to think about it also, in addition to your communication with them. When communicating with them, you have to think about what their perspective is, right? you have to kind of step back and think about how they've never had some of the experiences that you've had in higher education. So it may not be, even though it seems like they're not supportive, it just may be more of a lack of understanding of what you're doing as opposed to actually not being supportive. Another thing that I want to mention too is the importance of community building, which you're doing part of that right now in this program. There are several people around the room who said these are issues that they're facing, navigating challenges with family members who don't understand or don't get it. You can support one another. You're not alone in that. And it can be as simple as having people in your program or cohort you can sound off with, right? About how your dad, thinks you're like out at the bar when you're really, really in the library at 2 a.m. For real, but he's not convinced, right? Because that is not his perspective or his framework. Is not one where he's been surrounded by people who are going to be in the library at 2 a.m. So it doesn't make sense to him. So it might just be, having that sort of camaraderie and supporting one another. Because hopefully if you communicate with your family members, they become more understanding over time. But a lot of times the understanding will still be limited. And your family is people are who they are, right? And are limited sometimes in their capacity to change. So you also want to moderate your expectations in terms of what your family can do for you or not do for you. Okay, good. Thanks for sharing. In addition to family, other thoughts about other challenges related to race, class, gender, sexual identity? Yes.
Talking about the learning different leaders who will have to do some sort of like clinical experience or working with clients. So not everybody's the same. And I was telling Lori that I've actually experienced this from working in behavioral therapy and currently working in my job. The whole cultural sensitivity of others towards you, or even gender, is not always there. So they do underestimate your capabilities or how trained you are to do what you're doing.
And that's a great point because certainly in the research literature, but also in the way that we train students in your fields, there tends to, which is certainly progress from how things were in the past, there is a strong emphasis within the programs on your cultural sensitivity, right? So your cultural sensitivity as a social worker, as a counselor, or someone working in public health, right? How you need to be culturally sensitive to your clients or patients or whatnot, right? So we learn about those strategies and tactics. But what is less often talked about is how sometimes clients or patients or the people that you're working with may not be sensitive to your culture. And may question maybe your ability to do your job. I had one student who he's usually the primary caretaker for his dad because his dad has cancer and his dad doesn't speak English. They're Vietnamese, and he had just recently taken his dad to the doctor. And one of the nurses, as he was doing the interpreting, said, "Oh, your dad doesn't speak English. How long have you been here?" And they've been here for like 20 years. She's like, "Oh, really? Shouldn't he speak English since he's been here for 20 years?" And she kind of kept harping on it too throughout the appointment as well. So something like that, where she clearly was not a person who is being sensitive to the patient and delving into issues that don't have anything to do necessarily directly with the treatment of the patient. But it could also be the other way around again. It could be a patient or client or someone you're servicing who doesn't see you as capable as maybe your colleague who's from a majority group, whether that means that they're a man or white or whatever it may be. other thoughts, other challenges, issues you can think of surrounding race, class, gender, and sexuality? Any particular topics you're interested in covering in this session?
Again, it goes back to the first two questions, just to know how to react or how to go about a situation where it's wrong and discriminated against.
Okay. Being discriminated against. Any other thoughts?
We also talked about imposter syndrome and how to overcome.
So you've already had discussions and conversations about imposter syndrome.
It was just me too.
Okay. Take some of the next 6 slides. It's gonna be a short session. My next slide is dealing with imposter syndrome, which in very simple terms refers to the idea that you're in a particular environment and you have this sense, this feeling that you don't belong there or you're not fitting in, or you're not the same as the other people, in this case, who are in the graduate program with you. And this tends to happen more with people, right, who again are from first generation backgrounds or lower socioeconomic status, etc. Because of course, traditionally, institutionally, institutions of higher education were not originally built to serve and include women, the LGBT community, people of color, etc. Those institutions. So it's only a relatively recent development that we see this kind of diversity in the student population. But the majority of institutions of higher education are still majority white, majority middle and upper class, majority people who are second, third in their family go to college. And so there also becomes this questioning of your abilities too. Your ability to do well in your classes, your ability to succeed. So why do you all think that people get imposter syndrome?
Maybe because we come out from our undergrad as, oh, like we know so much. But then when we come into our grad program and we're exposed to so much more information, you're like, maybe I don't know so much. And so you think everybody else knows it, and so you think you're the only one that doesn't know it, and so you feel.
Yeah, and it's in part because you're going to that next level, right? I'm sure all of you were very good to excellent undergraduates. But then you're going on graduate school and being surrounded by other people who are also very good to excellent undergraduates. And there's this higher level material, and it's just a much more intense environment intellectually and academically that can cause you to potentially question yourself and wonder if you're really that prepared to be successful in your courses in your program. Other thoughts about what might be driving the imposter syndrome?
It can also be related to your upbringing. Maybe you didn't have that kind of support, harsh time of your academics. And so when you probably do, you just place your little, like, how do I even get here?
Yes, so it's not part of your upbringing. Students who are the second, third, fourth in their family to go to college or even graduate school, that generally means from birth that is normative within their family. It's just a given that you're going to go to college or you're going to go to graduate school. Right? So it's woven into the fabric of their socialization. If you're first generation, it may very well not be, at least not in a very tangible way where you have other people who can speak to that experience. So these are some of the internal dialogues or conversations or thoughts that happen with imposter syndrome. One is this thought that I'm the only one, and that could refer to a variety of things. I'm the only one from this particular background. I'm the only one who doesn't know this information. Right? Everybody else seems to know this theory that we're talking about in the seminar, but this is the first time I'm hearing from it. So it seems like everyone else knows it. Thinking also that everyone else is smarter than me. They're from quote unquote better schools than at Cal State. People might be working for UCLA, Cal, and private schools. How am I going to compete with them? Because those are such great, fancy, high-ranked schools. Everyone else knows more than me. They use words, language in class that I don't even know what those words mean. So these are all very, very common with the imposter syndrome. The important thing to know is that in many ways, these thoughts do reflect genuine feelings, but overall they're misleading you. They're misleading you to question yourself in a way that you don't want to question yourself. Because questioning yourself too much and letting the imposter syndrome kind of take over will eventually cripple you in your ability to do well in your courses and be successful and graduate from your program. Right? It's kind of the self-fulfilling prophecy thing. So then the question becomes, what do you do with those thoughts? So how do you combat them, or as I would term it, answer back? What do you do when you're kind of overwhelmed with these thoughts that you don't belong in this program for whatever reason it may be? And there's a variety of things you can do that I would frame as interrupting strategies. We all have internal dialogues with ourselves, where we have thoughts, but we can also respond to ourselves. We can also intervene and try and move past some of these thoughts. And mind you, you may never be able to completely get rid of them. And I don't say that to mean like there's no hope kind of thing, but that's just the reality of it. I'm 14 years into my career in higher education, and there are times that I still have imposter syndrome. Definitely earlier on in my career here, I would compare myself to other professors in the department and look at like, oh, person already has like 4 publications and I only have 2. Oh, I know that person has really high teaching evaluations and mine are good, but they're not great like that. It's the imposter syndrome, right? I was thinking that like, I don't know if I belong in this department in terms of my abilities. So it can be something that continues on to your career, but if you can work on developing these interrupting strategies, you can manage that imposter syndrome. So one thing that I used was to focus on the things that I was really good at. And recognize and validate myself for that. You have to validate yourself at certain points. You can't wait for other people to do it. It's great when other people do it, of course, but you have to be able to do it for yourself as well. So I'm thinking, for example, there was one professor, one of many who I compared myself to in my department for having a better, more extensive publishing record than I did. And we actually had co-written a paper together. We were at a conference, we were presenting. And basically the short and the long is, I saw that my colleague wasn't that great of a presenter. It's really dry. The information was just there on the PowerPoint, but very monotone. Like he wasn't a great presenter. And he worked and mentored a limited number of students. And it was not as if in my like, oh, haha, he's not good at that, right? It was just more like, oh, okay, I see. Like, he's not as good at mentoring students as I am, right? But that doesn't make him not belong here. I think he belongs here. Right? That just means that maybe that's not his strength. Right? Just like maybe I am or not as strong as him in terms of publishing. But for each of us, that's not an indicator that we don't belong there. It's just an indicator of the reality that everyone has strengths and weaknesses, or strengths and things that, to put it in a better positive framework, things that they can work on. There's no reason I can't work more on my publishing record, talk to people like, how did you get that many publications, right? What are your strategies? What are your approaches? How do you get through the writing process, the editing process to get something out to a journal? I can do that. He can work on his presentation stuff. We have a faculty development center on campus that does professional development for faculty. And they have sessions on things like how to mentor undergraduate students effectively, or how to be a more engaging instructor. So even for those areas that you need to improve on, it's not, oh, I need to improve on them, but I'm just gonna kind of sit here and see them as weaknesses and not move forward. It's, well, what am I gonna do next? So for me, that was one of my interrupting dialogues, was to recognize by actually observing that all of us have strengths and weaknesses, and that we all belong here, okay? Because that's one thing to remember too, is that rest assured, if you're accepted into a graduate program, you deserve to be there. Admissions committees don't just hand out acceptance letters willy-nilly. Oh, I'm gonna accept this person who I think is not gonna succeed in the program, or who I think doesn't belong in the program. People chose you. People saw your potential, your abilities, also, and not just currently, but your abilities and potential for the future. People saw that in you and admitted you to the program. So that's one important thing to always return back to in terms of dialogues, is that you're here because people recognize your ability here. And so you need to recognize your own ability and claim your own space and spot in your graduate program. Other modes of interruption is also having dialogues with yourself. As I just mentioned, say with first generation, recognizing that you're not going to be the only one who's facing imposter syndrome. You're not going to be the only one who is feeling like you don't have enough family support. So you can seek out community on campus or within your cohort. And sometimes you might have to go beyond your program or department. Some people enter with cohorts, right, with the other group of students who everyone becomes the best of friends over long term, each other's weddings, babies, the whole nine, right? But there are other cohorts where it's just personalities, right? People just don't necessarily like mesh together, and you're not finding your BFF in that cohort. They may be a graduate student in a totally different program. So get out there and become involved, right? See, if there's graduate student organizations, get involved in them. Make it a point to try and meet graduate students outside of your program, especially if it seems like the vibe is that, you're not necessarily gonna mesh well with those in your cohort, or there's not a lot of compatibility for deep friendship. There's no reason why you can't seek out graduate students elsewhere. So even though you might feel that you're alone in this, interrupting that, I feel like I am alone in this. That's what I'm thinking, imposter syndrome. Then I'm going to interrupt that and say, but I know I'm not alone in this. And I know there are steps that I can take in order to connect with those other people feeling similar to how I feel. Also, this issue about your level of knowledge. A common thing that I've observed in graduate seminars is oftentimes there are particular students, which is like one or two people in a class, who are the big talkers, monopolize conversations, okay, but also use these kind of big, what I call jargony words, right? Technical words, and their language is just kind of littered with that jargon to the extent where they're making these comments in class, and you're kind of thinking to yourself, what is this person talking about? And then you think, and this is part of the imposter syndrome, well, I'm just must not get. But that's not necessarily the case. Because frequently people who use an excessive amount of jargon, they actually use it to conceal their own insecurities. They feel like, oh, fancy language, so I'm just gonna throw out these words every other sentence because I feel like it makes me look more sophisticated. But when you break down and kind of listen, you know what all the jargon means, and listen closely to what they're saying, you're realizing that they're not saying very much. Or they could say that sentence with a simple subjective verb minus jargon, but they're not. So it's important to know that just because someone uses super complex or jargony language doesn't mean that they're smarter or more capable than you. And in fact, it might be that they have similar insecurities to you, but they just conceal them in a different way. Has anyone ever had experiences like that? You know, maybe in undergraduate? Talk a lot or convey the image that they know a lot? Yeah? I feel like most people have that experience. I also like these particular graphics as an illustration of imposter syndrome, so what you feel versus what the actual reality is. Okay? So the first one, this is a graphic illustration of how imposter syndrome is manifested in what you think your level of knowledge is versus other people's level of knowledge, right? So imposter syndrome tells you, like, I only know this small amount of information. And everybody else knows this amount of information. So that's what your imposter syndrome is telling you. That's what you're feeling. But this is more so the reality. That you have a certain knowledge base. You do. Other people have certain knowledge bases. Some places is overlapped. Some places you're going to know what this person knows, and vice versa. But other places, maybe there are things that you know, things that they know that are separate, and they don't overlap. That type of distribution of knowledge is more so the reality. And that connects back to what I was saying about recognizing that we all have strengths and areas of improvement, right? We all have different types of knowledge. And you may find out, yeah, it might be a reality that you find out that you don't know as much about a particular subject matter or theory that it seems like you should know more. But that doesn't mean that you should kind of sit there and let the imposter syndrome take over. But you can do something about that. Again, if you're all in grad school, you're extremely intelligent. If you feel that you need to know more about the theory, that's when you're in the library at 2 a.m. That's one of the things you're doing is reading up on that theory. So that you're taking a proactive approach to actually tangibly increasing your level of knowledge and your feeling of competence. Again, I think building community is really important, which you're already starting to do that here. So, I mean, I definitely encourage you, even after you all go off to your programs, finish your summer program here, that you keep in contact with one another. They don't lose those connections. It's really easy to lose connections if you don't make an effort to foster them and maintain them. And ultimately, community builds your perseverance. Because sometimes, for example, maybe that imposter syndrome is just breaking you down. Maybe your strategies of interrupting, you're just getting really tired and it's tough. Well, it helps to have that person, have that friend who can step in and be the interrupter. Who can say, no, like, you belong here, right? Just as good as other people, right? Who can provide you that validation. Okay, so how do you build community? As I said before, graduate student associations, exploring outside your department, going to events. That actually can be a really important thing in some departments. That is a part of the culture of the departments, but sometimes, especially if you're from a first-gen background, you may not realize it. So I'll use myself as an example. My whole pathway to graduate school was very not advisable. I pretty much didn't do anything that you're supposed to do. One thing that I wasn't familiar with was kind of the culture of a lot of graduate school. So especially in doctoral programs and in some master's programs, they may have things like that are called like brown bags or symposia. And usually that means that there's a regular schedule of events, either on a weekly basis, monthly basis, where a professor comes in and gives a talk, right? Basically about their area of expertise, their research, etc. And so when I was in grad school, so we had brown bags like bi-weekly or something, right? So it was pretty frequently. I would look at the brown bag schedule and say, oh, like economic sociology, not my field, like I'm not going to go to that. I'm going to go work on the stats homework, right? Oh, this next one, doing food studies. That's not it. I'm not going to go to that. I'm not going to go to that, right? Because I thought I looked at the topics that the professors were speaking about. I was like, that's not relevant to me, right? That's not based in higher education or sociology. So why would I go to that? I'll work on whatever homework. But what I didn't realize is that that's not really, those symposia and brown bags are about the knowledge and content, but they're also about forming relationships and networking and expanding knowledge. And honestly, what I would say, showing face. So it's about going to the presentation on food studies that I don't really care about. Right? Maybe I'll learn something more, right? I mean, that's always good, even outside your specialty area, to be able to expand your knowledge, because then you can engage more with people who are in other subfields or areas of expertise in your field. But then it's also about being in that room and sitting next to a professor who I haven't met before, right? Or who I've only had passive contact with, but who may turn out to be a really good mentor, or someone I want to be on my committee, or someone who's going to tell me about that scholarship that's not advertised widely. So it's about the relationship building and the networking with other people and being a presence and present in your department so that you're recognized as an active member of the department. Because that's how you get on people's radars for everything. So that's how you get on people's radars, again, for scholarships. Like for me, for example, there are things that come across my desk in terms of scholarships that I get sent emails about that aren't necessarily like widely advertised. But usually when I get something like that, there's a few students who pop up in my head, like, oh, I think they could be competitive for this, so then I send them the information, right? But I can only think of them, and they can only pop up in my head, and I can only give them access to that information if I know who they are and have a relationship with them. Or even if you're thinking about job pathways and professional pathways. That professor and that clinician, they can't think of you for that job opportunity that just came through their email if they don't know who you are. So relationship building is also opportunity building. So you have to think beyond kind of the box that I was thinking in, again, which is like, I don't care about that. Why would I go to that event? So on that note, just to say a little bit more about faculty mentorship. Of course, at the graduate level, one of the key differences is going to be how closely you work with faculty members. Okay? Whether you end up doing whatever it may be, comms, a thesis, a project, or even just in your classes, you're going to be smaller. So you're going to have more personalized contact with professors than you did when you were an undergraduate, right? So they figure even larger in your academic success degree than when you were an undergrad. You know, there's this saying for an undergrad, C's get degrees, right? Okay. People who are crossing the stage to, pick up their fake, not real diploma. Who knows if they're ever going to get the diploma in the mail. There's some people who walk and like, really, you're walking? There's, the person who gets, has the B average is getting like the same diploma as the person that has C average, right? And it's more about just meeting a basic level of competency and passing your classes, right? At the graduate level, you're operating at a higher level. It's not just enough to be basic and competent, right? Basic doesn't do it anymore. And you have professors who are going to need to be able to like specifically sort of give you their stamp of approval to get through your program. And it's going to have to be more than just average. So those faculty relationships are really, really important. But faculty relationships are challenging, right? What are your thoughts on that? I mean, thinking that maybe even about your undergraduate experience, what are some of the challenges that you think there are that you might be facing in terms of forming relationships with faculty members? So meeting with them, talking with them.
Well, I was commuting, like back and forth. So like try to avoid traffic because if I hit traffic, it takes about like an hour and 20 minutes to get home one way. So like trying to find the time that would work for me and their own office hours. So what I started to do was I stayed. Well, I showed up early and then I just stayed later, talk to them, and I would just walk with them to their office and stuff. So like that was my opportunity because I couldn't have made it to their like official office hours. Yeah.
And that's excellent. Okay, that's an excellent approach because I've run across so many students, who are running into problems in their classes, they're struggling, right? And so one of the first questions I always ask them is, have you gone to the professor's office hours or have you talked to your professor? And they'll say, oh, well, I work during my professor's office hours. I need to get, to my little brother's school to pick him up, so I can't go to office hours. And then it's just kind of like, that's it. And I'm like, and what? So you can't make it to their office hours. That doesn't mean that there's no opportunity for you to have a connection with that faculty member. That's a great strategy, right? Show up early to class or stay a few minutes later. Or just straight up ask them. Say, every day that we have class or when you have office hours, I need to leave right away to go to work and my work schedule is really flexible. Are there any other opportunities to meet with you outside of your regular office hours? There's nothing wrong with asking that at all. And a lot of faculty will be super accommodating. They will say, yeah, of course, I've got these other time slots this week outside my regular office hours. Let's set something up. So don't ever be shy about asking them. They're a good professor. They want to be able to reach students and connect with students. And they don't want a student just to be shut out because they can't make their regular office hours because of work. Other thoughts about forming relationships with faculty members? Challenges, issues?
Similar to Jesse, I also talked to them before and after, and actually like made my way to be their teaching assistant or of course assistant the following semester. Like able to work well.
Good. So also what I see there too is building rapport, right? And maintaining a relationship. So even after you take someone's class and you do really great in that class, maybe you move on in your coursework, you don't ever take a course with that person again, you should still maintain that relationship because you did really well in their class. Maybe you connected with them well on an interpersonal basis. Check in with them on a regular basis. You know, pop into their office, say, "Oh, good, I just want to say hi, hello," because again, it's about relationship building and opportunity building. I can tell you the number of times that I've had students email me and say, introduce themselves and say, "Oh, I took your urban sociology class 2 years ago, and I got an A in it. I'm applying to grad school or I'm applying to this job. Can you serve as a reference or can you write me a letter?" No, because I don't know who you are. You have to understand, like, most faculty members, right, accumulate, like, you teach hundreds and you get to the thousands of students, right? And on top of that, even if I remember that person, it's like, if they didn't form a relationship with me outside the classroom, I'm like, what am I going to say about you in a reference check? I can't really, I'm not going to be able to ask any of the questions that I'm not going to be able to answer them. All I'm going to be able to say is, yeah, she was really good in my class. She got an A. So I think she's really smart. That's all, right? If they ask me, "Oh, what do you think is for this position? She's going to have to work with a diverse population. How would you gauge this this potential employee's cultural sensitivity and ability to work with diverse populations?" Just because you got an A in my class, that doesn't tell me anything about it. But if I knew you, right, if I have a relationship with you, then I can answer those questions. Same thing, like if you go on to a doctorate or PhD program, I can't write you a letter if you just got an A, because that's going to be my letter. Like, your admissions committee, you know, Sally Jones got an A in my class, period, sincerely. Because there's nothing else for me to speak to. And if I tried to, it'd be false, right? So it's important to also not only form, but then maintain those relationships over time. And again, that can just be checking in periodically. I'm not talking about something super formal or intense. It's just popping to someone's office, saying hello, shooting them an email. "Oh, I went to this conference and this presentation reminded me of the stuff that we had talked about in class." Just that sort of thing. A couple of things related to issues of race, class, gender, is that the faculty and the professoriate, so to speak, doesn't usually reflect the student body at this point. So in other words, and it's more true in some disciplines than others, but in other words, there tends to be less diversity among faculty than there is among students. Essentially meaning that usually faculty is whiter, maler, and straighter, and upperclasser than the student population. So you may have faculty, for example, who just because it's maybe not their personal experience, they don't understand like first generation students' experiences. So they may not get that you have to work a certain number of hours. And you just have to make sure that you moderate your expectations of faculty and know that some of them may not fully understand all of your experience. But that's okay, right? Because you can also have multiple faculty members who are mentors. Sometimes people think I just have to have one mentor. I mean, you might have one particular mentor who's guiding you through finishing your master's, but you can have informal mentors because faculty members have different capabilities too. And sometimes students expect or want their formal faculty mentor to be the be-all, end-all. The intellectual mentor, they want to be the person who they can go to cry to about their family stuff, the whole nine. but you have to understand that people have limits as far as their capabilities. I was left then one student excellent student, right? But she was facing some challenges at home, and she was in a meeting with her faculty mentor, and she starts crying about her family issues. Faculty mentor sitting there across the desk, just for a pen and a pad, something out. Here's the number for counseling and psychological services. And it's not that she was trying to be mean or anything. It's just that that's not her deal. Right? That is not within the domain of that professor. I mean, professor, unless they're specifically within the field of mental health, right? Professors, aren't trained to be a psychiatrist. Okay? That's not within their toolbox formally. So for her, for a student to come in there crying and wanting to be comforted, like emotionally and psychologically, that was just like, okay, like that's not my deal. You got to talk to somebody else about that. And it's not her trying to be mean. That's just not within her skill set and her domain. Conversely, you do have a lot of faculty members who would be okay with that. But you have to understand that some people are going to be okay with things with that, some people aren't, right? So maybe that mentor is an amazing intellectual mentor. Go to talk to her about your coursework and your research or your future aspirations. But she's not the person who you're going to go to talk to when you have family issues. But then that's when it's useful to have an informal mentor over here, another faculty member who you form a relationship with. Maybe they are not anywhere in your subfield, but you just like them as a person, and you mesh, you get along interpersonally, you can go cry to them. So understand that there can be different types of mentors who give you different things, and to try and not expect everything all in one person. Do you guys have any questions about working with faculty, approaching faculty? Yes.
So for my undergrad, I don't have any problem like reaching out to them. I still like kind of shoot them an email like, hey, I hope your summer's going okay, and like just random things. But like for grad school, like if it's someone that I don't have trust with, like, but if I want to still reach out to them, like what would be the best way to go about it?
There's a couple ways you can do it. You can do what I call a cold email, because you don't know that person, where you introduce yourself. I'm first year in such and such program. And this is always great because faculty have egos and we like to hear about yourself. I've read your article on X, Y, and Z and found it fascinating. I would love to sit down with you and chat a little bit more about your research and what your graduate school experience was like. Do you have some time to meet? Is it okay if I stop by your office hours? Or you could actually go and look up what their office hours are and do sort of that same introduction, right? Because office hours are open and open to any student, so you could do that in person as well. So I think the most important thing is to make it clear why you're reaching out to them, and also that you've done your homework. So you know what kind of research they do, what courses they teach, because they're going to want to know, like, why do you want to have a conversation with me? Just because. I mean, you want to express some level of interest in their work. And you can say, I'd like to talk with you a little bit more about your research. I'm adjusting to graduate school. I'm interested in knowing about what your graduate school trajectory was like. That's also a legitimate line of inquiry. That's a great question. Other questions? Oh, and also just, I think we covered most of this, but also you can form faculty relationships outside your department too. Increasingly on college campuses, both at the undergraduate level and graduate level, there's a lot of interdisciplinary work that's done. So a lot of you guys, when you spoke about what your topics were, you may be grounded in a certain discipline, but your topics of interest definitely are studied in other disciplines and are relevant in other disciplines. And there are definitely people doing work across disciplines that pertain to your topics, right? So don't confine yourself to forming those faculty relationships within your department. Those are probably the more important ones, but also look at related departments on campus. So the psychology department, what's going on with them? Do they have faculty who are working on, mental health issues? Oh my gosh, look at this professor. They published like a book on it. Reach out to them. Ask them for a meeting. Other issues with respect to not only faculty relationships, but also relationships with other students can oftentimes be communication styles. Usually our cultural background or socialization or upbringing can affect the way we express themselves, or being an English as a second language learner, right? May still kind of affect the way you think of things linguistically in your head and then how you express them verbally. And sometimes that can be uncomfortable. Right? And go back to the imposter syndrome because you feel like you're not articulating things the way you should be, right? And that the way others are communicating conversely makes you feel uncomfortable because you're not quite sure what to talk about. So you definitely want to be aware of that and manage those communication challenges. As I said, part of it on the other end, if you feel like you don't understand what other people say, is just understanding that some people just use jargon to use it and to seem smarter. Or sometimes it may actually illustrate a level of knowledge that you haven't yet acquired or that you need to fully develop, and you can do that. The one common thing for oftentimes students of color, students from a lower socioeconomic status, immigrant students, English second language, is the issue of code switching. Anyone familiar with? Yeah. What do you know about it?
When you're thinking of a certain language, to switch that to writing or process it in another language.
Okay, yeah, kind of close. It's more with your actual literal language. So, for example, some of us come from backgrounds where the way you speak English involves certain slang or certain sentence structures that aren't grammatically correct, right? But it's the way that you communicate. So, for example, in my background, it might be something like, "Don't be doing X, Y, and Z." That's not correct to say. Don't be doing this. Don't be doing that. Like, don't do this, right? The be thing, it makes it not grammatically right. So in the academic environment, oftentimes, and I learned to do it, you do what's called switching, which is that you kind of learn what the academically acceptable ways to speak. And not that you totally completely change who you are, but that you understand like what's normative, and what might be appropriate in certain circumstances and not in others. So there are certain circumstances where I use certain slang or sentence structures that aren't grammatically correct, but there were certain like select people who I'm really close to, like on a professional level, and I know if I speak that way, they're not going to be questioning my intellect. But then there are other contexts, usually maybe with other colleagues who I don't know as well, who I wouldn't speak that way with, who I would speak proper, formal, complete English, proper grammar, sentence structure, etc. Because I'm aware that if I don't, they might question my intelligence or how professional I am or how serious I am. Right? So that's an example of code switching. Right? It's making your language kind of culturally relevant or specific to whatever the circumstance is or whatever the other people are you around. So you want to learn the different types of language. Also, it is important to learn the jargon. That doesn't mean that you have to use it all the time, like how some people do, right? And of course, you still want to be yourself as well. I've had a lot of discussions about that with students who feel sort of conflicted. They feel like talking a certain way or writing a certain way. I don't know, I don't feel like that reflects the authentic me. And that's a constant, I think, sometimes negotiation process. Right? And sometimes it becomes sort of philosophical and personal too. So like in my writing and research, I don't use a lot of jargon. So in my actual publications and journals, you'll find there's not a lot of jargon. But that kind of has to do with like my professional and personal viewpoint and reason for being in higher education. And that is, it's always about my sentiment that I would want someone who just graduated from high school, or maybe didn't graduate from high school, didn't go to college, definitely didn't go to grad school. I would want that person to pick up that journal article and read it, and maybe they don't get everything that I'm saying, maybe they don't understand my discussion of methodology, but they could kind of get the gist of what the overall points of the article. And that's just something that personally and professionally is important to me because, you know, my hope is that my research has some kind of more direct or tangible impact on communities, on underrepresented communities, low-income communities, etc. So I feel like I want to make things as accessible as possible. Yeah, I'm still operating within a certain academic context, but I choose to write a certain way. So some of it comes down to like your development professionally, how you want to position yourself, what's important to you. So at some point, certain decisions may have to be made. We also talked with actually kind of circling back to our beginning discussions about family and the stuff that family says with respect to your graduate school education. Right? So again, the family who says that you're going to be done at a bachelor's, aren't you going to get a job, etc. What's graduate school? You don't know what graduate school is. You need to get a job, start making money. You also need to contribute to the family, so you should be working. Or also the kind of you don't have time for us anymore. A lot of us come from more collectivist cultures, which is common for communities of color and immigrant cultures, where there's more of an emphasis on community, in large families and doing things together. And that's very different from traditional American culture, on which institutions of higher education are built. So institutions of higher education are more rooted in individualistic American culture. So sometimes those two might clash. And sometimes it's not perfect. It's just a balancing act. And it's also the decisions that you make. Personally, for me, going into graduate school, my mind frame or viewpoint was, I know this is going to be really demanding, and I'm not going to be able to be spending time with my family necessarily every weekend. They're not quality time. And there might be some parties that I'm going to miss. There are a lot of parties that happen impromptu too. And that's okay, right? It might be hard, but that's okay. I know I need to commit a certain amount of time in order to be successful in this graduate program. But I'm not willing, this graduate school is about being willing to do things, but also knowing who you are and what you're not willing to. But I wasn't willing to give up everything. I was like, if this particular program means that like, I'm not gonna see my family for the next 6 months, that's not for me. For some people, that might be okay with them. They might be happy about seeing their family for the next 6 months, right? But for me, I was like, okay, that's gonna be an issue or a breaking point. So I did a balancing act. Cut down on family time, but closest family members, always make sure to make their birthday parties, right? maybe didn't make like the fourth cousin's birthday party. Just sent them a text instead, right? Instead of going. And so you kind of decide what's most important and how to spend your time in a valuable way that advances your academics, advances your professional career, but also keeps you connected to your family, or whether that's your biological family or adopted. Again, just to reiterate, with family, I think the most important thing is to be patient and communicate, explaining, and you might have to do this several times. I mean, mind you, you can talk about the financial benefits 10 times, and then they may still ask you the next day, so why did you get a job right now to make money? Good answer, yes. You got to be patient sometimes. And some of these things you'll have to repeat over and over again about why you're doing. But you just have to be patient and again try and think about what their perspective is, and think about their background and the fact that they didn't have the opportunities that you have, and they didn't get a higher education. So they're just not, right? Their frame of reference is not your frame of reference. So you kind of have to be a little bit empathetic to that sometimes. That's actually all I had. Any questions? Yes.
Could you share your experiences, like trying to find mentorship among faculty?
Yeah, well, my experience with faculty mentors overall was very positive. I think part of it is my discipline in the environment or culture of my graduate department. Of course, if you're talking about something like sociology or ethnic studies, usually those are the most diverse faculty populations. So the 3 faculty members who were on my committee were all people of color. My chair was a Japanese American man. My other members was Mexican American. Another one was a Chinese American woman. And I think at least probably 2 of them were like first gen, grew up lower socioeconomic background, and were very connected to and concerned with issues of race/gender, because that's what they studied. Right? So they had that sensitivity. So my mentoring relationships were really positive for that reason. And also they help counteract some of my other struggles in the program. Okay. There are like kind of long stories behind it, but there are certain mistakes that I made in grad school. I'll put it this way. There are certain mistakes that I made in grad school and made in my program that if I had been in another program, another sociology program somewhere else, with another set of faculty, that might have been, to be dramatic, but might have been deadly to my progress as a grad student, meaning that I wouldn't have survived in another program. As a program, there aren't kind of in terms of the politics and the cultural norms, there isn't room to make certain mistakes. And you make certain mistakes, and they're like, why are you here? You should be here. Right? But I was able to make certain mistakes with these faculty mentors, and they were understanding. I think in part because of, in broad terms, like similar backgrounds, but also that kind of cultural sensitivity. But that's certainly not the case for everybody. I had friends in grad school who had bad experience with mentors. Sometimes also too, thinking about background, and I always tell this to my mid-year scholars, I'm like, don't make the mistake of thinking that just because faculty members are from a similar background than you, that they're going to be a great person for you, or they're going to be sympathetic to the challenges that you face as a woman, as a first-gen student, etc. Do not make that mistake, because there's a lot of times you'll see that you were sorely mistaken. I just came back from a UCLA symposium, and one of the keynotes was she is like the first Black political science, female Black political scientist to get tenure at UCLA, which was in 2014, which is very sad. Great, that's that. But she made that point too, and I liked her phrasage. She says, "Skin folk ain't always kin." Meaning that just because someone is like of the same background or same skin color than you or whatever doesn't mean that they're down for you or down for the cause. I had another faculty, like more informal faculty mentor, who was a Black woman. And for example, when I shared with her where I was applying for positions towards the end of my graduate program, I applied to all Cal States and liberal arts institutions. I didn't apply to any like UCs and stuff like that because I knew I wanted to be at more of a teaching institution. So, because if you go as an academic to UC or something like that, you're going to do research and publish and do research and get grants and publish and do research and get grants, etc. Right? The teaching is not that's not really your main profession, right? But I was interested in doing more hands-on direct work with students through running programs and through teaching. So I knew that Cal State or a smaller liberal arts would be more suited to me. So I remember running into her in the hall and her asking me like where I'd applied. I was like, oh, let's do that. And she just looked at me and she said, oh, Patricia, really? Cal State? And that's what I'm saying, and it would have been a mistake for me to assume, like, okay, just because she's like a woman of color, that she's going to be kind of all open and progressive about this stuff. No, there's tons of people of color. There's tons of first generation people who come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who buy into the same elitist system as the majority groups, right? Who buy into those normative values and who support them. So that's another important thing too, because you may assume, okay, this woman of color over here is going to be this amazing mentor, but maybe she's not, and maybe it's the straight white dude over here who's actually going to be really embracing of you, even though he's not from the same background, but he's going to provide you the support that you need. So be careful too about making assumptions about faculty members just based on their background. Because it becomes very disappointing and also demoralizing. I've definitely had students who have had those expectations of faculty members, and then when they see it, that's not what it is, they're sort of taken aback, right? Because they're kind of assuming, again, that since you're from this background, you're going to understand what my position is, what my experiences are, and I did have friends who also had very traumatic experiences with faculty mentors. I mean, the PhD, you're operating at a whole other intense level too, where you're working even closely with other faculty members, and there is a certain set of faculty members. I think it's less so at institutions like Cal State's. I think it's more common at research institutions who are just very there are some who can be abusive to their graduate students and exploit the power that they have over their graduate students. So again, it's like that's the person who's going to sign off on your stuff. It's not just about passing some random professor's class, it's about them. And I've seen faculty members, again, not so much at the Cal State level, but at other institutions who will exploit that control. Or also gender issues. Conversation the other day, I had a friend who had both of her kids when we were in grad school. And mind you, her mentor was very well regarded. He did a lot of publishing in education, sociology of education issues, equity, equality, very progressive stuff, right? But I think it was the second time that she got pregnant, he got mad at her. He didn't talk to her for 2 weeks. And I think when she told him, she was like, why'd you do that? Why'd you go do that, right? Which is such a contradiction, right? Because he was the same dude, behaving in this sexist way, right? And definitely not family-friendly way, is going and writing all this stuff about equality and equity, right? And you will see that you can oftentimes observe that disconnection, which is just sort of jarring sometimes. So there are all kinds of issues there too, oftentimes surrounding family, that usually unfortunately are more pertinent to and are more challenging, usually for women than they are for men. And not just because women are the ones who get pregnant, but because of certain assumptions that are made about women who have families or who are single parents, assumptions and ideas that men are not exposed to or subjected to as much. So there can be a very diverse range of faculty mentor experiences, from wonderful to not so good. You know, and starting off in your programs, one good thing is to talk a lot to older students in your program, those who are farther along in the program, just to get feedback on professors. Oh, you know, you work in so-and-so's lab, so what is that like? Yeah. I'm just talking about like, don't look like you're like digging for dirt. Okay, just open-ended question, like, oh, what's that professor? Oh, what's that? Because you don't want to be that person, right? But then that blows back on you. Just open-ended question. What's it like working for that professor? So, open-ended question so people can share with you. Oh, yeah, she's really type A, anal personality, and she's always on me with deadlines. Right? So, oh, you know. Yeah, that mentor, he's really kind of laissez-faire, hands-off. He lets me do my thing, etc. It's like collecting data and intel on the faculty members to see who might be suited to you. Because of course it's about the work that they do, but then there are also personality components. My chair, main faculty mentor, was very, as I would put it, laissez-faire, very hands-off. Not that we didn't meet, but he wasn't as rigid as a lot of other faculty mentors who I saw. They're very clear with their mentees. You need to do X, Y, and Z by this date, and if they didn't turn it in by that date, they were going to hear from their faculty mentor. Like with my faculty mentor, if I didn't turn in a draft of whatever it was by a date we agreed upon, if I didn't do it, he wasn't going to like come out, like call me or tell me. He was just like, you know, like wait. Right? Where other faculty members, I mean, they are on their calendar and they're like, oh, you're supposed to turn her stuff in. Where is it? Where's your stuff? Right? Yeah. I mean, I know I'm like that with my grad students here. And sometimes it's a philosophical thing. Sometimes it's just the personality thing, the way the person is. But like my philosophy is you're in grad school, you're an adult, you're choosing to be here. I'm not gonna chase you. Like say you're gonna turn in, let's let review this research paper by this date, and I don't get it. Okay. Like, I mean, you're slowing up your own progress, not mine. So, but I have other colleagues who would, you know. Those are just different styles, and you have to know what mentoring style and personality is going to mesh the most with yours. Other questions? Thank you. And again, if you have any other questions about grad school, navigating these issues, or if you're interested or even pondering the doctoral route eventually, over the long term or after this, you know, by all means, feel free to shoot me an email.